Hello, Chris here. Today I'm going to go over how to set up your DAW environment to your liking. This will involve going through the settings, make sure all your preferences are set up how you like them, and then we're going to go into how to set up your default project file, your template file, essentially. So first we're going to start out with going to the preferences over here, edit preferences. And these are all obviously your preferences. My preferences are I like to keep the mouse knob range very precise. Automation cleanup level minimum. That means that it leaves all the little tiny dirty squiggles and whatnot when recording automation. If you want to keep your automation curves nice and smooth and simple, and you can keep that to maximum, but that's up to your preferences. We're also going to go to trigger notes while editing. I like to keep that on. Returned to last start position on stop. That means if I came over here to like 13 right here, put my marker here, hit play, listen to my song, blah, 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 and then hit space bar or stop, it'll put the head or whatever back to 13. Some people really like that. Some people don't. I think this is a new option and I think it's a good option. So I recommend checking that on. You can reduce your cable clutter by showing cables for selected devices only. That's fine. Works for me. You have the cables animate, show parameter value tooltip, keep that on. Show automation indication. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Maybe it's the little green square that'll show on devices where their parameters have been automated. So like a volume knob on like a synthesizer will have a little green box around it because I've automated it. I would recommend keeping that on. I recommend playing with the themes. I prefer the blue one. There's also a dark one and a default one. And then later on, we're going to get into this default song setup. I think right now you're going to want to use empty until we set this up. So change that to empty if it's not already there. Close reason, open it back up, and then we can mess around with creating the template later. For browsing, new devices get browse focus. That's nice. That means if I throw in a grain sample manipulator, it'll automatically navigate the browser to the place in my computer that has all the presets for it. And then load default sound and new devices. That's fine. Oh wait, no, we want to keep that off. Otherwise, every time you load in a Thor polysonic synthesizer or a subtractor analog or whatever, it's going to load in some default preset essentially, and you're going to be right-clicking on it and hitting reset every single time. So I recommend just coming over here, unchecking this option, so you don't have to do that. And then self-contained samples when loading from a disk. Unless you're moving your file around from computer to computer, your like project file, I recommend just keeping this unchecked. Doesn't really matter. And then this doesn't do anything right now. Reason Plus isn't even out yet at the time of this recording. So now we're going to go over to the audio tab, and this is where it's important to know whether or not you have your interface set up. Right now, because I'm doing recording stuff, like desktop recording for this video, I'm going to keep it on the default Windows drivers. If you have an interface and you want to use its inputs and outputs and you like to have low latency with your keyboard, you're going to want to come over here and pick the ASIO version of the driver. Most interfaces have their own, so if you don't already have one downloaded, go to their website, download their ASIO file or their ASIO driver, and then select that in this drop-down list. That will give you better latency. It'll allow you to use the inputs on your interface and even some outputs if you have multiple outputs. And then I recommend using 48 kilohertz. There's a debate whether you should use 48 or 44.1, which is this guy right here. For higher quality recordings, you're going to want to go with 48. You can crank it up even higher, but that's kind of, nobody really uses these to my knowledge. They're for very special use cases. 44.1 is the default sample rate of like a CD, I believe, and MP3. But we're going to keep it at 48 for now. If you find a reason to use 44.1, then you can change that here, no problem. One thing to keep in mind though is when you're exporting your song, when you're rendering it out, it asks you whether or not you want to export it at 44.1 or 48K or whatever. Always match what you have in here. If you have a mismatch between what you have in here and what you have when you're exporting it, say I'm trying to export it at 44.1, then it'll alter the sound of your song. It'll sound different. It'll hit weirder. It'll sound softer, pillowier. You don't want that. So just match the export to what your DAW is set up as, and you won't have any problems. I'm going to leave this here for now because this is only temporary, like how I have this set up. But I recommend playing with this slider. The lower, the better for latency, but it also makes the computer think harder. It has to do things more quickly. And if it's too low, if it's too far to the left, then you'll get these crackling sounds. Things will start getting choppy. And sometimes the project will just stop playing altogether. So whenever that happens, you have to crank it over to the right a little bit. I would also not really touch this if you have an interface set up, because usually your interface will have its own area to change that. And then this will just automatically update to reflect that. So, just see if like my Focusrite equipment has its own software that lets me change its sample rate. So I would use that instead. Otherwise, I might crash the DAW by doing that. This is where you have all your active input channels and output channels. This doesn't really matter if you don't have an interface. If you have an interface, look at what kind of outputs it has. Like if I had this set to my Focusrite ASIO, it'll show 6 devices, and then 2 of those 6 are just loop back. They're not actual inputs on the device, so I usually disable those. Performance, use multi-core audio rendering. Yes. Use hyper-threaded audio rendering. Yes. That's just if you have a modern CPU, I just have those checked. You might have to play around with that if you're like using a laptop that doesn't have virtual cores or something like that. Not entirely sure. I have this unchecked render audio using audio card buffer size setting. For whatever reason, when I had this checked, there's a certain VST that would just crash whenever I tried using it. So unchecking this actually fixed that problem. It hasn't really caused any other adverse problems that I'm aware of, so it works for me. You probably can just get away with leaving it on. Monitoring, this is for when you're like recording with your audio interface, like microphones and guitars and whatnot. That affects this little green button right here. If I were to click that, it would turn green, and then I'd be able to hear the input of, like I'd be able to hear a guitar that I have plugged in. This just dictates whether or not this comes on automatically. I have it off because it's kind of annoying to have it on automatically in some certain instances. Also can affect like you can get feedback loops if you have weird routings with your setup. So I just keep that off. I keep that manual. And then obviously you want to play in the background. Control surfaces is where you set up your keyboard. If you don't have like a standard keyboard, what you can do is do add manually and then go to other, and it should work, hopefully. I had to do that with my Elasis Q49 in the past. Right now I'm using an Arturia key step. I've had hit or miss issues with like Novation MIDI keyboards. So your mileage may vary. And then if you have any hardware, this is where you'd interface with that. I have a Digitact, and I also have MIDI. I have a MIDI interface built. I have a MIDI interface built into my audio interface. So I can send messages from my computer to my hardware and from my hardware back. But if you don't have any hardware, don't worry about this. Also have it set to standard instead of separated. This just means that whenever I click on a device, like if I have a Europa just sitting in my rack, I click on it in this area right here. If I click on it, it will send all my piano notes to it. Sync, if you don't have any hardware, don't worry about that. This is where you'd set up your sync, your clock stuff. You don't have to worry about that. This is kind of useful if you have this set up. Send, stop, and continue when repositioning. But yeah. Advanced, this is where you'd set up your VST folders, your scratch disk folder. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about it, obviously. And then language. So we're going to come over here, and after you've already reset your DAW to an empty one, I'd change this to template. Actually, we probably have to create the file first, so leave this for now. Just leave it on empty. I'm going to open up that file right here. So I have that right here. It's going to look very similar to what was just on screen. So this is a file that Reason's going to use as a reference to having like a starter template for you. I have some adjustments I need to make to my own, so this is a perfect time to make a recording about it. So I just got a new monitor. I'm going to put some people like to keep it the way it is. If you have a single monitor, that's probably a better way to just have it, is to have everything built into, like, the sequencer will be in the bottom of the window, and then the rack will be on the left, and then, you can hide and show different sections. I never got accustomed to that. I just used multiple monitors instead. So if you have multiple monitors, you can come over here in window and detach the windows. And then you can send this like over to your right monitor or your left monitor. Just lay it out how you think you'd like it. You can always come back and change this as well. But since I have this monitor, I can set this here. And then I can come over here. And squeeze it right there. And stick my mixer. Don't really need it that big. It's fine. Okay. So that'll be the layout of every new project that I create. So we can quickly go through all the things you can have set up ahead of time, your creature comforts. Let's start with, I recommend keeping the master compressor turned off if you're brand new to this. This will just affect your sound in ways you probably wouldn't necessarily know how it's affecting your sound. So just keep that turned off for now. I'm going to keep it on just because that's what I'm used to. It's not a good idea to even have it on, but until you need it. But I have a bad habit, so I'm sticking to it. So we have our mixer set up now. I could also set up sends and whatnot and returns, but we can do that some other time. Now in the sequencer area, I like to have looping turned on. I like to have click and pre-count turned on automatically. I might actually change pre-count to be off. I don't know. It depends on what you like. My default tempo, I like to be at 95. If you like to make four on the floor dance beats, dance tracks, 120 to 132 is a good range to start at. If you like, I think trap is 140. I'm not sure. Drum and bass and whatnot can go to 140 to 160. It's whatever you prefer. Also, quantize record is on. And that's about it, really. the nitty gritty of your setup will actually be over here on the right. My master chain has some devices in it that I usually like to keep in there. Actually, I don't use this anymore. I have the VST version of that. And yeah, let's delete that too. I could put Ozone 9 in here, but every time I'd launch Reason, it'd take a while to load because loading Ozone 9 takes a minute. So I'll just do that, keep it empty. I can hide that here. I'll keep that here. You can also, if you have stuff already in here, I don't know if the empty project does or not, but if there is stuff in here, you can just have it bypassed, and then whenever you want to use it, just unbypass it and tweak it. If we flip around to the back, this is a nifty little setup to have. I think master out by default comes out here to audio output, but we also have this setup connected to hardware interface too, sampling left input. So each track here looks like has a record source button. Whenever that's clicked, you can come over to an audio track and select that. Oh, that's so much nicer. I don't even know they set that up that way. But yeah, this audio track can now listen to Kong 7.8. If I uncheck that, it doesn't show up there anymore. By default, it'd be good to have record source on for your master section. And then if you ever need to bounce multiple tracks, this is one way to do it. There's a couple ways to do it. But you'd mute everything else but those tracks that you want. And then come over here and do master section. And then if I hit record, it would record all the stuff that's coming through my master section to an audio track. And then I can chop it up, I can stretch it, I can do whatever I want with it. So that can be handy. So I recommend just having that set up, record source. So that's our master section pretty much set up. And I think in a lot of projects, I use the Kong Drum Designer for everything. It's my favorite drum interface. You could probably get away with using NNXT or whatever. Or I've forgotten what the what the drum device is. That was default redrum. You could use redrum. You could put that here. In every track, I have this, so I just have it in my default setup ahead of time. In addition to that, I recommend you doing this. I might make a video on it separately, but all the outputs, the auxiliary outputs for the Kong device have their own, well, not all of them, but a few of them already have their own mix channels. So that lets me come over here and create usually a kick drum first. Bam, we have a kick drum now. But now it looks like it's coming through the main output, which is this guy right here, of the whole Kong device. So all the percussion is going to be mixed with that kick drum and then comes out here. But usually you want to use your kick drum for side chaining, or you want to, process it. So I already have it set up to where I can come over here and change the output of this drum pad to 3 and 4. So now it's coming out down here. It's no longer coming out up here. And then if I were to create a snare drum, where are you hiding snares? Down here. Which snare drum right here? Right now it's coming through the master. We can change that to 5 and 6. Now I can process my snare drum separately, and so on. So that's why I have all these set up right here. Quick and dirty. Lets me get in there and start clicking on drums. And then I have an audio track all ready to go because I use hardware like synthesizers, and it's just nice to be able to open up a project, a blank one, and have it all ready to go with an audio track I can record on. So you can have that as well. It's up to you. And I think that's about it as far as setting up. Oh, there's always these options over here. Let's see, what do we have? Reduce cable clutter. That can be nice. It just makes things what? Press K. It just makes things translucent. What that does. Auto group devices and tracks. Sure. Delay compensation. It's up to you. Ooh, this is a new option. Show CPU load for devices. That's if like your project is chugging and you want to see what's causing it. You can use that. Show navigators. Yes. Always show tutorial area. Actually, get rid of that. Don't need that. Follow song. I personally hate this. Hate it when it's on. That just means that if you're zoomed in on an area of your sequencer and your little head over here moves past it and goes outside and out of the bounds, it'll automatically follow it. So then I don't like that, so I keep that off. Show block clip content in song view. Sure. Keep events and clip while editing. I might mess with that later. Keep auto color track and channel. Oh, auto color tracks and channels. Yes, that's nice. Record automation into note clip. That can be nice. Keep number of pre-count bars. 1's fine. Enter edit mode. That's what that is. And blah, 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 blah. If you go to window over here, this will let you detach or attach all your windows. Tool window is kind of hidden. It's kind of weird that it's hidden because it does expose a couple features that normally aren't there. If I were to show that, I can quantize notes by a certain amount. That's kind of cool. Some random ticks in between. I can change the pitch of notes that I have selected. If I transpose, or I can randomize them. You can change the note velocities, scale them, set them to a certain number, random note lengths. You can mess with that. Legato adjustments, scale tempo. Okay. Alter notes. So yeah, this is stuff that it's kind of weird that it's off in its own little window. And regroove, you probably will never ever mess with that, but that's there. Just keep that in mind, I guess. Hide spectrum EQ window. I like having it on. And yeah, everything else is pretty much set up. So now that I have this all set up, I'll flip this around. Over here, go to file, and because this is already an existing file, I'm just going to save it, overwrite it. And now every time I launch a new instance of Reason, it will have this set up. For you though, you save it as whatever you want. Save it as default or whatever you want to name it, and then go over here to preferences and go to template, and then pick it from the list. Pick it from where you saved it. You can also have it set to load last song on startup. That's kind of a neat feature. I personally don't use that, but I can see that being useful. But yeah, that's about it really. So yeah, I hope that helped with setting up your environment, and hope to see you next time.